All right. Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're diving into some fascinating wildlife and conservation. Seems like someone out there is getting ready for a test on all things nature. Maybe even thinking about taking a hunting course, huh?
That's right. And let me tell you, whether you're prepping for a test or just want to deepen your understanding of wildlife, today's deep dive is going to equip you with some seriously valuable insights. We're going beyond just surface level facts. We're going deep into the core concepts so you can confidently analyze any statement that comes your way.
I love it. So let's jump right into it. First up, something we hear a lot about, habitats. Everyone knows it's where an animal lives, their home, but it's got to be more than just a physical location, right?
You hit the nail on the head there. A habitat is so much more than just an address. It's the entire support system for an animal. Everything they need to survive and thrive. Food, water, shelter, and enough space to, go about their animal business. And get this, all those elements are completely interconnected.
Oh, I see where you're going with this, like a delicate balance, kind of.
Exactly. Let's take deer, for example. Say their population explodes because there's tons of food available. Guess what? That means more meals for predators like wolves, so their numbers go up too. But what happens if a disease hits the deer population? Well, both the deer and wolf populations could crash because the whole system gets thrown off balance. It's a delicate dance.
That makes the balance of nature idea really sink in. Speaking of balance, something that really surprised me is how hunters actually play a crucial role in conservation. Like, buying hunting licenses actually helps fund these efforts.
That's a huge point, and one that's often misunderstood. Those license fees are a lifeline for conservation. They go directly towards things like habitat restoration projects, researching wildlife, and even managing populations, to prevent stuff like overgrazing or disease outbreaks. It's a really powerful example of how using a resource sustainably can actually make it healthier in the long run.
It really does challenge your perspective. Now, game animals, they're defined by law and can be hunted. But how does the law actually determine which animals are considered game animals?
All right, great question. It all comes down to careful management. Game animals are specific species that have been legally designated as okay to hunt, with regulations in place to ensure we don't overhunt and cause problems. This makes them distinct from protected species, which you absolutely cannot hunt. So, for example, in listeners' likely region, deer might be a game animal, while something like a bald eagle would be strictly protected. These laws help maintain biodiversity and make sure things stay balanced in the ecosystem.
There's that balance again. Okay, this next concept is a bit of a brain twister. It's called succession. Change in habitat, continuing change in animal populations, and continuing change in carrying capacity. Whew, that's a mouthful.
I hear ya. It sounds complicated, but it's actually pretty cool once you break it down. Think of it as a never-ending cycle of change in an ecosystem. Imagine a massive forest fire rips through an area. Sounds pretty destructive, right? But it actually kickstarts a whole process of renewal. We call this secondary succession. First, you get these tough little plants that love the sun popping up in the ashes. Then insects start to show up, followed by small birds and mammals. And as the forest gradually grows back, you get different species moving in. And even the carrying capacity, how many individuals the land can support, starts to change too. Eventually, you reach this sort of steady state, what we call a climax community, but it's never really permanent because, change is the only constant in nature.
That's a fascinating way to look at it. It shows how nature is always adapting and evolving. Now, speaking of challenges, a big one for wildlife, especially in certain seasons, it's winter food shortages.
Absolutely. Winter can be brutal for wildlife. Imagine trying to find a meal when everything's frozen solid. Food becomes scarce, the temperature plummets, and animals have to find ways to adapt. Some migrate to warmer areas, some hibernate to conserve energy, and others might even switch up their entire diet. It's amazing to see their resilience.
It really highlights how adaptable they have to be. Now, back to basics for a moment. All living things need food, water, shelter, and space to survive. But why is that so fundamental?
It might seem obvious, but it's the bedrock of ecology. Those four needs are what tie everything together. They're the reason habitats are so crucial, why we have those fascinating predator-prey relationships, and why conservation is so important. If any one of those needs isn't met, the whole system can start to crumble. It's like a delicate house of cards. You take out one card, and the whole thing can come crashing down.
So if those basic needs are the foundation, then conservation is all about making sure that foundation stays strong, right? Conservation as the wise and sustainable use of wildlife resources. But what does that actually look like in practice?
Great question. It's about finding that balance between using resources and making sure they're healthy for the long haul. Think of it like managing a bank account. You can take out some money, but you also need to make sure you've got enough left to earn interest and keep things growing. Conservation is about making choices that are good for both people and wildlife, both now and for future generations. It can involve things like habitat restoration, setting up protected areas, and even regulating hunting to keep populations in check.
That makes sense. And speaking of hunting, something that seems kind of counterintuitive at first.
Yeah.
It says that both hunters and conservationists were actually instrumental in starting the whole movement for wildlife protection and management. How does that work?
Yeah, it's a bit of a surprise, isn't it? But those two groups actually have a lot of common ground. They both recognized early on that without responsible management, wildlife populations could get decimated, even driven to extinction. Hunters, in particular, they really understand the importance of healthy game populations. They want to make sure there are animals to hunt for future generations. Think of figures like Theodore Roosevelt, an avid hunter who was also a huge champion for conservation and setting up national parks. It's a good reminder that caring about nature can bring people together from all different walks of life.
I like that perspective. All right, now let's tackle a tougher topic. Predator control. Destroying animals in order to protect livestock. It's a sensitive subject for sure.
It definitely is, and it's one that raises a lot of ethical questions. The important thing to remember is that predator control should always be a last resort. It's typically used when human activities, like raising livestock, directly conflict with the natural behavior of predators. While it's important to protect people's livelihoods, we should always try to find ways to solve those conflicts without resorting to lethal methods. Things like using guard dogs to protect livestock, better fencing, or even modifying habitats to reduce the chances of encounters.
So finding those ways for humans and wildlife to coexist peacefully, even when it's challenging. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the intricate workings of habitats and succession to those tough winter challenges and the vital importance of conservation. It's amazing to see how interconnected everything really is.
It truly is. But remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to understanding wildlife. There's a whole universe of fascinating knowledge out there. If you're itching to learn more, I definitely recommend checking out bcfirearmsacademy.ca. They have a ton of free resources, both online and in-person courses, and even challenge exams if you really want to test your knowledge.
That's a great resource for anyone wanting to dive deeper. And as you continue to explore the world of wildlife, here's a thought to ponder. How can we, as individuals, make a difference in conservation efforts in our everyday lives? It's something to think about.
I couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating world of wildlife and conservation. We hope you're walking away with a deeper understanding of the natural world and the confidence to ace those tests.
See you next time.